welcome everyone. My name is Dominic. I'm one of the co-founders of Five and the CEO of the company. This is the very first time that we're holding a webinar, and we're very excited to speak to you about the industry that we're in, which is low-code software engineering. Now, we are a Cyberport startup. We joined Cyberport in October 2021, and I'd like to give a quick shout out to Jay, who's joining us as one of the presenters today to introduce Cyberport to you. Cyberport has been tremendously helpful in our business development. They've been tremendously helpful in promoting this webinar, and they also helped us a lot with getting some very high quality meetings in Hong Kong, some of which actually converted to some of our first clients in Hong Kong, such as Rico, which is a company that we're now working with. So a big thank you to Jay, and I'll quickly hand over to Jay to introduce Cyberport to you before we start speaking more about low-code engineering. So over to you, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. In case you guys don't know, Cyberport, we are a digital tech hub in Hong Kong with a mission on driving technology innovation. Recently, we are fostering our Web3 ecosystem, and today we just have a ChatGPT forum in Cyberport here. Can I go next slide? Yeah. We are one of the largest digital tech community in Hong Kong, towards the 2,000 startups and IT companies here. We also have 6 unicorns here and 2 virtual banks, 3 virtual insurers, and recently we got a virtual asset trading platform. We have 3 main application focus. One's fintech, smart living, and digital entertainment. We also have 3 technology focus, which is AI and big data, blockchain, and cybersecurity. So if you are not a member and working on digital tech related projects, you are welcome to join to this big family, either through our program or join as a office tenant. So after the webinar, I'll share with Dominic a bit more Cyberport, and then he could share you how to enroll in our program or being a tenant. So thank you for your time. So Dominic, I will pass the time to you.
All right, thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for introducing Cyberport. Now, let's speak a little bit more about low-code software engineering. In fact, there's one event that I quickly wanted to highlight to everyone, and that's the low-code hackathon that's currently taking place. That's a hackathon that we're organizing. In case you're not sure what a hackathon is, it's a competition for software developers, and we're asking software developers to build an application using our low-code IDE. Now, if you build one of the best applications in this competition, you have the chance to win cash prizes. We're giving away more than 60,000 Hong Kong dollars in cash prizes, and every valid submission also enters the lucky draw for an iPhone 14. All you have to do is sign up on five.co/hackathon, so you can see the URL right here. Once you've signed up, it's pretty simple. You can download Five for free. So Five is available through our website as a free download. Once you've installed Five, you can start building applications with it. And if you build something that's truly awesome and deserving of one of these prizes that I've just mentioned, well, then you will get them. So do make sure to participate in the hackathon. As I said, we're just running this event pretty much as we speak, and you have until June 9th to submit your application to us. And for more information and the sign-up page, visit five.co/hackathon. Now, we are also a partner of AWS. We've been working very closely with AWS since we started this business and since we started deploying Five on the cloud. So I'm really, really happy to have Clifford here today. Clifford is a startup solutions architect in the Hong Kong AWS team. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Clifford used to work as a .NET developer before. And I think he will give you some very interesting insights about how AWS thinks about application development as a little bit of an introduction to the field of low-code. So I will hand over to Clifford for now, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Dominic. Hello, everybody. Let me just share my screen. So yeah, as Dominic mentioned, I'm a solutions architect here at AWS, primarily focusing with startups, working with startups of different sizes. As Dominic mentioned, I have been a developer for quite some time now. I think professionally for the last decade or so, over a decade now. But yeah, I primarily started with .NET. Well, even before that, did a little bit of PHP, C++ stuff. Then moved on to .NET primarily for a while, um, and used .NET for quite a while until we started playing around with a bit of Node.js, Python in my last company. I used to work for a media company in my last job. So we faced, I think every developer's faced all sorts of similar challenges as I have in developing modern applications. Most distinctly is in the past when we're building, when we're fostering, let's say, a development culture. It tends to be a very long tail approach. It can feel sometimes very slow. Uh, have you ever launched an application that has been running for a while and you end up focusing on other things because the size of it, you end up losing the ability to start maintaining it. We start talking about technical debt in this area. I faced all these issues all the time at all my previous jobs. Sometimes where they take down full production systems, and I remember very distinctly having to be up until I think 6 a.m. trying to fix a database issue. Just was an absolute nightmare. And of course, that's where bugs come in. We ended up, I think, in my last job, we had one situation where during development, everything was perfectly fine, but when we launched it, just because of the nature of it being public and there was a much larger audience using that feature, it ended up overloading our database, which then caused huge issues and took downtime. All of these in traditional development cycles really causes software to degrade over time. You may have heard people talk about things like technical debt. I used to have to describe it to people, to business users, as like building a house where your foundation is your foundation is eroding, and you're trying to build new things on top of it. Well, you're trying to build new things on top of it is fine and it works for a certain amount of time. As the foundation degrades, the whole thing can collapse at any time. So it gets worse over time. And this is one of the challenges that I used to face in a lot of legacy problems. Now, moving slowly or with legacy development, what is the key takeaway? This is usually when we talk about it from a technical standpoint, businesses don't tend to really care about technical debt. I've spent years talking about it. The priority is usually on the business side. And this actually really does affect the business side of things because it makes it a lot slower to develop. Because you're slower to develop and build these applications, you become less capable to reacting to changes. In this day and age, you can see with the advent of all these machine learning, generative AI things, there's the ecosystem is changing almost daily. I'm having to try and keep up with all these different new technologies. There's all these different ways of doing things, and just really keeping up to date or being able to react to not just that, but market trends and market changes, even with customer changes. That can really slow down, and by the time you get out and release to market, you're already too late. Someone else has already done that, or the trend has already changed. Now, in a modern development lifecycle, you may hear terms like waterfall versus agile, and while I will still say that each have places, they still can exist in modern times. There are different trade-offs with each one. So, in traditional waterfall, if you're not familiar with it, it's a very step-by-step and phase-by-phase approach. So if you're building an application, you have a design phase, you have requirement gathering phase, and each one cascades onto the other. Because of that, you have long iterative cycles before you release your application. Because they're all dependent on the previous phase. Let's say design phase is your design phase is dependent on requirement gathering, research, and then your development phase is dependent on the design phase. Each one can't begin and progress until the next one. So because of that, it takes a long time to get to the actual development phase. And when changes start happening, it's very hard. If changes happen early on, it's very hard to change, or it impacts the entire cycle of the waterfall approach, the entire beginning to end of development. So this creates a very long planning cycle, which, as I mentioned earlier, limits the agility. With agile approach, because you end up adopting, it's more of a cultural shift to iterate more frequently, release more frequently. You build features bit by bit rather than wanting the whole thing. I remember I had at my previous job, I had to change this mindset, or it took me forever to change this mindset. Because a lot of people want to have the most perfect product, want to have the most perfect final thing before they're comfortable releasing it. But because of that, you're really slow. I remember I had one project that ended up getting stuck for almost a year, back and forth, got deprioritized, and then by the time we were ready to launch it, we basically had to rewrite it because it was already outdated and everything, and already not really up to market trends. So fostering more iterative cycles with Agile really helps create that frequent testing, frequent iteration, frequent feedback. Because you're breaking it into iterative cycles, you end up creating this flexibility whereby changing after one cycle or one sprint, you can then decide how the next sprint will change. It doesn't have to be set in stone before that happens. And from that, each sprint cycle will have a feedback mechanism, and you can iterate from that. And this is very important when it comes to modern practices, because you need to be able to be flexible. You need to be flexible with changing of requirements, because there are times where you will think that your product is going one direction, and then your users end up using it differently, and suddenly you have to go back to the drawing board and change it and incorporate it. This introduces that much earlier. And because of that, you can produce much higher quality of applications and producing at greater speed, because you're not having to go back to the drawing board. And this is essentially the key aspects of modern development. You basically want to shorten the time from idea to production. I usually talk with startups about the concept of an MVP. An MVP doesn't mean an unfinished product. It just means, what is your core product values? What are your core product that differentiating values that you need to incorporate, that needs to be a bare minimum? Because of that, you also have to minimize the risk of traditional slow development. So all the issues I talked before, it's not necessarily a development issue. It may be a cultural issue within the team culture. So there's a lot of things that you have to be cautious of when minimizing these long cycles. And a really important part of this is also this continuous cycle, continued iterative cycle of continually improving systems. Traditionally, you may release one big version upgrade, and then everything else is bug fixing, and it just is done. But in the modern lifestyle, that's not really what the market demands. So there's a lot more need for new features and a continually improving ecosystem. That's why you have SaaS platforms that are providing their platform that's continuously being updated, rather than buying a singular version of a certain product. And this is essentially how we at AWS also foster our development culture. When we talk about our willingness to fail and experiment, we talk about our innovation flywheel. So the innovation flywheel is essentially what I mentioned before, is a continuous iterative cycle where you continually experiment on something. If you have an idea, you want to experiment with it, go for it. We talk about the concept of two-way doors, where we want people to be able to build an experiment, but also keep in mind when you're building things, make it so that if it doesn't work, if it fails, you're able to step back and just go, okay, no harm, no foul to that. So we talk about two-way doors, two-way door mechanisms built into all our experimentation, which also allows people to feel more comfortable with experimenting. Since I joined AWS, I was very surprised with the amount of things that I traditionally would not have been able to push for, or it would take a lot of approval for. The number of times where I've wanted to experiment with things that may be kind of out there, that's not part of the current practices, and my manager just goes, "Is it a two-way door? If it fails, can you go back?" "Yeah, okay, sure, try it. Just go for it." And then you build up this experiment, you start gaining feedback from it. From those feedback, you either get new ideas, you either decide, oh, this doesn't work, change the experiment, new experiment, or you get new ideas from that. There are a number of services that and stories I can tell you where people have pivoted from their core product to another idea just because of these customer feedback. And all of this is actually purely cultural, but we're here to talk about more about the application development stuff. And when we talk about that, you take all that cultural concepts in mind, the iterative approach, the ability to get started and build something very quickly. You can take that and put that into the development cycle as well, into the core of the development cycle. Now, at AWS, we talk about the concept of undifferentiated heavy lifting. So what that essentially means is that what we look to provide from AWS is the ability to handle the common heavy lifting across multiple users, multiple industries, multiple sectors. No matter what you build, there is the recurring factors that you need to do, such as picking a server, developing your application, deploying it, and this is where we try and simplify, and this is how modern applications can really be accelerated to an even further degree with modern tooling. So as I mentioned, infrastructure management complexities can be simplified. Like from our perspective from AWS, there are toolings that we provide. Traditional infrastructure where you would have to purchase hardware, you need to set everything up. All of this we create. This is where the cloud platform starts coming in, where all of this can be programmatically done and repeated. So we have things like infrastructure as code. All these things are there to help simplify the undifferentiated heavy lifting of the infrastructure management. Now, then we've talked about infrastructure, but then now you've got your application level, because in the past, generally these would be handled by two different teams. In the past, I was part of the software team, but we had a hardware team focusing on the infrastructure side, the servers. With the application side, that can get even more complex. And nowadays, with modern tools, there's so many different ways to do to set not just even build your application, just set up your project. There's different best practices. There's different toolings. There's different formats, things like that. I've fallen into the trap of spending way too much time just scaffolding my projects, and this is where we start talking about simplifying things like using frameworks, be a bit more opinionated. This is also undifferentiated heavy lifting, but from a software perspective. So when these two aspects, the software and the hardware combine, we start talking about how do we simplify the application on infrastructure? Because you may have simplified the development or the deployment of infrastructure, but your application may be complex. How do you combine these two simplified systems together? And these are essentially the undifferentiated heavy lifting of a platform. An opinionated platform, or maybe slightly more opinionated platform, allows for more flexibility or more agility when it comes to deciding on how to build your MVP, even with experimentation, because you don't have to spend all that time just deciding on all the different components. Experiment requires speed and requires you to just pick the thing that can help you build the fastest. And this is where low code comes in. This is where I personally feel low code will really, really benefit, because it's not necessarily taking a fully abstractive approach, much like how in AWS we abstract a lot of it, but we still want to provide the flexibility of changing or tailoring it to your needs. This is what I see low code bridging the gap between the whole system in place. And with that, I'd like to hand my time back over to Dominic.
Yeah, that's right. I'll take over from here.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for sharing the perspective of AWS onto application development. And I think a lot of good points in there in terms of how AWS takes over the infrastructure, right? And makes it more simplified for people to deploy applications quickly, and how that relates to what we're doing with the low-code platform. Now, let me start sharing my screen again. And I could see that a lot of people were just joining, so I'm just quickly reintroducing myself. So my name is Dominic. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Five. You just heard from Clifford from AWS, and I quickly wanted to mention this event again. So we are running a low-code hackathon at the moment. You can download Five for free, build an application on top of Five, and you can submit your application back to us to win prizes. Now, by joining this webinar, you've taken one big step in the right direction of winning this competition already. Why? Because you're going to hear from Benoit, who's our developer advocate, and he'll give you a really good introduction into what Five is capable of and how you can use Five to build applications very quickly. All right, so keep this one in mind, five.co/hackathon. Now, let's speak about low-code development. Now, Clifford mentioned a couple of points there in terms of how software engineering has evolved over time, right? And some people tend to say that, you know, if we extrapolate what has happened in the past, the future will be a codeless future. In fact, even people who are very much into software development and very much into code, such as GitHub's co-founder and former CEO, say things such as the future of coding is no coding at all. Now, what we want to present today is a slightly different vision for the future of software development, one that relies on higher levels of abstractions, sort of, you know, pre-built components that can be mixed with full code inside one platform. And that's really our definition of what low code is. Now, as I said, low-code development environment, Five is a low-code development environment that helps software developers to rapidly build, test, and deploy online database applications. And typically, when I speak to software developers, they might have heard of low-code, but they're not entirely sure how it applies to them or what exactly it is. And the purpose of today's webinar is really to break this down into pieces so that by the end of this webinar, all of you have a really good idea of how we define low-code and how you could use low-code in your day-to-day jobs. So I want to use two questions to sort of guide through my presentation. The first one being, what is low-code software engineering? And the second one being, how do I develop applications in low-code? So that's the purpose of today's webinar. We do have a Q&A sort of chat window. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, just feel free to put them in there. The Q&A is moderated, so any question that comes up, you'll get a response from us. Even if we don't respond to them verbally, we do have people moderating the Q&A, and you can ask your questions in there. All right, now let's start with what is low-code software engineering. I tend to think of low-code as an approach to software development that looks like this. You can use pre-built features as well as high code or full code inside the same platform to rapidly build and deploy applications. So there are a couple of things in there. So first of all, we're not just speaking about software development, we're also speaking about deployment. It's one platform that covers the entire process. That's really important. Secondly, there's that high code component I'll come to in just a second. But there's also this part right here, the pre-built features, what we're showing on the left. And if you had to think of an analogy to make this more, you know, understandable, the best way to think about low code might be thinking of your typical full stack frameworks, something like Ruby on Rails or Laravel. What do these frameworks do? They give you guidance in your full stack application development projects, right? They give you some pre-built features that make it easier for you to build the applications very quickly. And the use of pre-built features is something that we've seen over decades and decades in software engineering. As developers, today we rely more and more on things that have been built by others in the past. Case in point, or a good statistic to sort of drive this point home, is this one right here. So over the last, if you compare today's software developer to a software developer from 40 years ago, you'll find that today's developer only writes 40% as much new or modified code as developers did 40 years ago. How do we know? Well, there's a company that analyzes the long-term trends of software project data. They found out that the use of the writing of new code is steadily decreasing because we rely more and more on pre-built features. If you sort of want to take this thought to the extreme, you don't have to look far. And in fact, you can look at some of the biggest tech companies and how they think about software development. And you'll find statements like this, which I think is really interesting. So this is coming from a book on software engineering at Google, also called the Flamingo book for obvious reasons. And it says that code is a liability. Now, they say it's important to remember and accept that code itself is a liability. It might be a necessary liability, but by itself, code is simply a maintenance task to someone somewhere down the line. In fact, at Google, they're saying that if you're writing it from scratch, you're doing it wrong. Now, I think this is a really, really interesting statement, especially coming from a company such as Google, which probably manages one of the biggest code bases in the entire world. The reason it's interesting is actually this part right here. Code is a necessary liability. And that's something that we agree with. We believe that there is a place for high code. So we're in low code development really means, as I said, using pre-built features as well as full code inside one platform. In the case of 5, the technologies that we're referring to when we speak about high code are JavaScript and TypeScript for writing functions. We're speaking about CSS and HTML for customizing the way that your UI looks. We're speaking about a MySQL database that you can build on. And of course, we're speaking about a pre-configured infrastructure on top of AWS, where every application is running inside its own container through the use of Docker. And we use Kubernetes, the AWS Kubernetes service, for orchestrating the containers on the infrastructure. So that gives you a pretty good idea of what low code is. Now, what's the advantage of this type of approach? Cliff had already mentioned that speed of software development is super important because we need to make sure that we deliver software to our end users quickly. That's where the pre-built features come in. They give you speed of development. At the same time, we don't want to lose control or flexibility over what we're building. And there is no greater control or flexibility than writing full code, because there is no better way to give a computer instruction than writing full code. So far, no drag and drop or what you see is what you get approach has fully replaced, simple code that people can read and write and debug if they need to. Now, if we want to compare low code to other development approaches, let's say to no code and full code, because I feel these terms are being thrown around a lot by different vendors inside the industry. But to me, they're all very, very different. And I just want to explain what the difference is. So no code approaches are typically approaches that optimize for 2 things: the speed of development in a really easy to use platform. If you've never written code before, if you've never developed software before, by all means, go for a no-code tool, and you'll be amazed by what the tool can do, because there's a lot that you can build in drag and drop, and what you see is what you get. If you are a software developer, you will find most no-code solutions to be too simplistic, because you know that drag and drop and what you see and is what you get has certain limitations. But that's really what no-code tools set out to do. They try to replace code through visual elements at the sacrifice of application complexity. Now, high code is obviously an approach where you can build whatever you want to. You can build the most complex application in high code, you can fully code it, you can customize everything that you need to. Low code, and we at 5, we try to bridge high speed of development with ease of use and application complexity inside one platform, provided you are a software developer. This is really important. We give you pre-built features that can be mixed with full code in languages that you're already familiar with, such as JavaScript, TypeScript, SQL. And this enables you to build complex applications in the end. So that's what we're setting out to do with 5. Now, to sort of drive this point home and to really make it clear what's the difference between no code and low code, because oftentimes you might read articles from Gartner or IDC that speak about the no code, low code industry as if it was one. To me, they're very different. No code eliminates code. Low code celebrates code. That's really the difference. No code platforms are designed to eliminate coding to make application development accessible to non-coders and citizen developers. Low code platforms, and that's what 5 is, speed up software engineering to make application development faster and more productive for coders and software developers. It's a really, really important distinction. And because there's no sort of textbook definition from O'Reilly on this industry, that's sort of the definitions that we go by and how we see this industry. Now, my typical advice to software developers is always go for low-code platforms. Why? Because your existing skills will still have value. If you're a software developer that has written code in the past before, and you go for no-code, you're essentially downscaling yourself. Your skills will not have value inside a no-code platform. All right. So much about what is low code. Now let's move on to how do I develop applications in low code. Now, quickly wanted to take a look at typical application development nowadays, right? So usually when we build applications, let's start from the infrastructure. So let's start from the bottom. We have the choice between different sort of infrastructure as a service providers, AWS, GCP, Microsoft Azure, whatever you want to pick. We're obviously running on top of AWS. And then if you want to manage your deployment using some other technologies, you can use Docker and Kubernetes, for example. Database layer, you have the choice between different SQL, NoSQL databases, again, different flavors of similar technology from Postgres to MongoDB or MySQL. Business layer or application logic, you can write in full code, Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, whatever it may be, you can pick your favorite language. Last but not least, for the UI layer, we typically choose a library or framework to make things a bit easier for us. So we can choose React or Angular, or we can use a full stack web application development framework such as Ruby on Rails. On top of that, we also need different tools. We need our Visual Studio Code. We need to manage our code base inside GitHub. We need to merge our code, and we might use some JavaScript packages to make our life a bit easier. So this is traditional development. Now, how does this change when you use a low-code platform? When you use 5, you get a full stack development environment that covers everything from development through to deployment. So 5 covers your infrastructure, your database layer, your business layer, and your UI layer. And I quickly want to explain how exactly it does so. So starting from the top, let's start with the UI layer. When you build something inside of 5, you're building a responsive web application. It's an application that runs inside any browser, on any device, and it automatically adjusts to the screen size. We are primarily focused on sort of B2B applications, business applications, internal tools, operational tools that look something like this inside your browser. So that's the focus of 5, and that's what the front end looks like. Now, how can you customize this front end? Well, that sort of depends on who you are. I saw some of you who signed up have more of a backend engineering background or a database background. For people who are more backend focused, we provide a point-and-click theme editor or UI editor where you can quickly adjust how your UI looks. You don't need to have any front-end skills. You can simply choose different colors, fonts, and things like this. If you are a web designer, very front-end focused, you can adjust the raw CSS of your application, and you can adjust borders, margins, fonts, whatever you want to do, you can do it in full code. And this approach sort of comes back to what I mentioned earlier. Left-hand side, speed of development, very quick UI customization. Right-hand side, full control and flexibility in full code. Now, moving on, business layer. How do I build my application logic? So you can write JavaScript and TypeScript straight inside of 5 in an interface that very much looks like your Visual Studio Code. It comes with syntax highlighting, with auto-completion, and it also comes with a little AI assistant that helps you interpret code or debug your code. You can then use these functions that you've written by attaching them to events. So 5 relies on event-driven programming, again, sort of a standard way of building applications. If you want to build a workflow or any kind of if this, then that type of logic, you simply use client or server-side events, or you can use time-based processes or jobs to trigger your code. Database, one level deeper. So you get a fully provisioned MySQL database with every application that you build on top of 5. You can create your database, you can define relationships between tables. 5 lets you manage your primary and foreign keys. Anything you would typically do inside a MySQL GUI, such as MySQL Workbench, you can pretty much do that straight inside of 5. So you don't need to step out of 5 to manage your database. Not surprisingly, you can also write SQL queries inside of 5 because you're building on a MySQL database, and you can also build these queries visually if you want to. Infrastructure, we manage your AWS deployment for you. So we make it super easy. AWS, well, Amazon, when you shop on Amazon, you have that one-click purchase feature, right? We have a one-click deployment feature. Similar idea, you click once and your application is live. Even better, it's live in development, testing, or production. So we give you different environments. You can deploy to your sandbox, which is your development environment. You can deploy to staging or testing environment, and you can deploy to production, which is where your end users access your applications. Last but not least, we also give you a couple of tools to maintain your applications, such as a full audit trail or end user logs, which are part of 5 and the development process. So basically, in a nutshell, low-code development really means building a full-stack web application and deploying it from one solution, covering everything that you need to develop, to manage and monitor, and to manage your deployment. Now, enough of PowerPoint and the theory. I'll stop here and I'll hand over to Pranoy, and he'll give you a live demo of what 5 looks like.
All right, thank you so much, Dom. I'll just quickly share my screen. Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. I am Prinoy, a product advocate at Five. So before getting started, let me just quickly say that make sure you guys jump onto our website, which is at https:5.co. And after jumping onto our website, here what you want to do is you want to click on one of these start for free buttons, which is located in multiple places throughout our website. So once you click on the start for free button, it will navigate you to our sign up process. And after you're done with our sign up process and you click on sign up, you'll get an email which contains your serial number and your download link, which will further guide you on how to exactly install Five into your system. And that's how you get started with Five. So once you have actually installed Five in your machine, let's go ahead and open it. And this is the first thing that you're going to see inside Five when you actually first open it. Now, let's say that you are a developer who's been asked to create your very first app inside Five. Now, a question arises is that how do I get started? How do I actually build my first app inside Five? Okay, so what you want to do is after you have opened a Five, you want to click on applications over here. So let's click on applications and let's start off with making our first app by clicking on add item. Here, let's name our first application. I can call it my first app. You can pretty much call it anything. And then let's click on save, which is this check mark icon over here. So we click on save and bam, we have saved the application. After you have saved the application, you will get access to this blue manage button over here. So let's go ahead and click that. After we click it, we are inside the development environment of Five. So on top, you can see we have a bunch of menus from visual, logic, data, task, setup, and tools. Now, all of these have a bunch of features like visual will have forms, chart wizards, logic will have functions code editor. Similarly, we have data, task, setup, and tools. You can use these features to build your own applications. Okay, so what we have currently on our screen is an application called as My First App, which I made in front of you. And it's a completely blank application. So actually, let me run it and show you what it looks like. So in order to run our application, we're just going to click on this button called as run. And once we click on it, as you can see, Five will start loading up a local machine, a local application in your machine, which is indicated by this spinner. And bam, we have opened up our application. As you can see, it's a completely blank application. What we do have is a navigation bar on the top and a sidebar on the left, but these are given to us by Five from default for every single application. Apart from that, it's a blank application. Okay, so let's just cross it. Okay, so reiterating myself, let's say you are a developer who wants to build your first app. So let's keep very simple use case for this demo. Let's say that you want to build a simple customer form where you have a customer table and you want to populate that using a form. So the question is, how fast can we do that inside Five? Okay, so let's get started building our customer table. So how do we exactly build tables inside Five? Okay, so what you want to do is you want to click on data, then you want to click on tables. Here you want to click on new table wizard. After clicking on new table wizard, let's start off with naming our table. As we said, let's make our customer table. And after we name it customer, we can add a few fields here by clicking on this button. So let's just give it let's give it 3 fields. We can call my first field as name. Second can be email. My third field can be my city. Okay, here I can play around my data types. And if I actually browse it, you can see that I have access to all the basic SQL data types over here. But just to keep everything simple, I'll just keep everything as text. Let's just give them some default size over here to keep things safe. Let's copy it. And after we are done, let's click on save. And bam, within seconds, you have built your first table inside Five. Now, if you want, you could have done this entire process visually. What you could have done is you could have gone to data, but instead of clicking on tables, you could have clicked on database modeler. And now you can see that you are seeing your customer table visually though. Now, what you can do is you can click on any single field here. Let's say if you double click on name, you can go ahead and edit its every single property. Or you can even delete this table by clicking on cross, or you can even add a new table by clicking on the add table button here. So let's say new table. And bam, we have a new table. So you could do and like legit model your database visually. Okay, so let's go ahead and cancel this. And now let's talk about building forms. So in order to build forms inside Five, what you want to do is you want to click on visuals and then forms. So we just built a table. Let's talk about building forms. So after we clicked on here, you want to click on new form wizard. Now you want to select your customer table here. So your form gets attached to your customer table. And as soon as you select customer, you'll see most of your fields are filled in automatically. So go ahead and click on next. As you can see, 5 has automatically filled my fields for me. So we have a name, email, and city in my form. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on save again. And bam, we have also built our first form inside 5. So we've built a table and a form. So let's go ahead and run our application. And let's see what kind of changes that has brought into my application. Okay, so as you can see, we have already seen a couple of changes inside my app. On the left-hand side, you can see that I have a menu item called as customers. And now I have a interface here through which I can actually populate my table. So what I can do is I can click on add item. And now I can basically start typing my fields. So my name is Pranoy, email is pranoy@5.co, and my city can be Brisbane. Let's click on save. Okay, let's add on one more field just for everyone's reference. Can have any name, any dummy email, and any city. Okay, as now you can see that I have both of my records over here on the left-hand side. I can just go to and fro between any record. So it basically works as a proper form. So in all, you have built a working form in a couple of minutes inside 5. Few more things I would like to add into this application is, first, I would like to make this app a multi-user app. So whenever I open it, I get a login screen. Second, I would like to add a terms and conditions page. And third, I would like to change the overall look of this application a bit, basically play around with the theme. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about how to make it a multi-user app. In order to make your application a multi-user one, you want to go back to your landing page, which is you click on home. And now you're back on your landing page. Now go to applications, navigate to your app called as my first app. But this time, instead of clicking on manage button, what you want to do is you want to click on the edit button. And now you can see you have a little tab here called as multi-user. So go ahead and toggle it. And that's it. Now, after toggling it, now your app is officially a multi-user app. Next time you run it, you will get a login screen. The second thing that we talked about was adding a terms and conditions page. That is also really simple. If you just go to the last field here, which is called as license agreement, just go ahead and double click on that. And bam, now you can just type your license agreement over here. So I can be like, please accept my conditions. Yeah. And the next time you open a 5, you'll also get a terms and conditions screen. It's that easy. So you have a bunch of tools on top that you can edit around the terms and conditions page, or you can just convert the entire thing into an HTML or CSS page and just get your as much freedom as you want. But I'll keep things simple for now. So let's click on save. Let's click on save again. And now let's go to manage. And the third thing I want to talk about was to change the overall look of application. Now, Dom already talked that 5 provides you with a point and click theme editor. So in order to access that, you can go to setup and then click on themes. Now let's add a new theme. We can call it anything. I can call it my best theme, my best theme. Yeah, perfect. Let's double click over here. And now you see we have a full point and click theme editor right in front of us. Now backend developers are going to love this because you don't need to know any CSS in order to change the look of your application. Let's say if you want to change the color of my navbar. So just click on the navbar, select any color from here, and bam, it's changed. Let's say you want to change the hover effect of the breadcrumb, select breadcrumb hover, go ahead, select any color, and bam, it's changed. But let's say that you are a web developer who actually likes doing CSS, or you just enjoy that freedom. So what you have here is that we have actually provided you with the entire CSS for your entire application. So you have pretty much all the freedom that you want over here. Actually, for your reference, I actually do have some pre-written CSS over here. So let's copy that. Let's paste it over here. And let's go back to my theme. And as you can see, there is already a lot of changes in my application. So let's save that. Let's save that again. One last thing remaining is to actually attach my theme to my instance of my application. So let's go to instance. Click on my default instance. Now, basically, an application can have any number of instances, and all of the instance of the application can have its own unique look, its own theme, and their own logo. So currently, we're at our default instance. So let's just attach a theme, our theme to that. Click on save. Oh, first, we need to select a user interface. So let's select any one of the top. Let's save. Click on run. Now, what we have done is we have added a login screen, a terms and conditions screen, and we have changed the overall look of the application. So as you can see, we've run our application and we have encountered our login screen. So what we want here is we want to set up a password for our admin account. And that can be done by typing admin both at both places. Then click on sign in. And now we can set up a password. Update password. And now you can see after updating my password, I get my terms and conditions screen. So let's accept our terms. And bam, now we are inside the application. As you can see, it already looks a lot different. Okay, so in a couple of minutes, we actually talked about building an application and adding a couple of other changes to it, like a multi-user screen, terms and conditions, and a custom theme to it. But let me paint you a little different picture over here. Let's say that you are a developer who has been asked to actually work on an application which has already been built using 5. Now, question arises is that how can you contribute to that application? Okay, so for your reference, actually, let me open a different app this time. Okay, so on your screen right now, actually have a login screen for a property finder application. So actually, let me log into this application and show you how it looks like. Okay, so on your screen right now, you see a landing page for a very simple property finder application, because again, built using 5. Now it's again a very simple application where we have 2 different roles called as customers and managers. So customers, they can basically send a booking request for basically they can send a booking request for a particular property from this list. And after they have sent a booking request, after filling their credentials and they click on submit, managers will get those records and they can view at data sets. They have their custom dashboards for all of the records. They can send survey requests to a particular customer about a particular property, or they can look at individual customers who have sent a request. Okay, so let's say that you're a developer who's been asked to work on the customer form, and you've been asked to basically enhance the experience of this form. So what can you do? So today what we'll do is we'll actually attach this entire process to a third-party messaging service, such that whenever we click on submit, we get a custom notification here from any messaging platform, so that we are alerted whenever a customer has actually made a booking, so that managers can actually jump onto and look at the records. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. Okay, so on your page right now, what you see is a process. A process is just a form which has no table attached to it. And what we're doing right now is that whenever we click on submit, we are actually calling a very simple JavaScript function. So let me show you that. So jumping back to the development environment for my property finder application. So this is my development environment for property finder application. And so let's go back to my process, which is process, booking requests. And now after clicking on booking request, I get access to all of its details. What I want to do is I want to click on fields. And now I have access to all of my fields, which was there inside my UI. So let me actually open it side by side. So here, as you can see, I have my property key. I have a label called as your details, my customer name, my city, another label called as when we like to visit the property, and a field called as booking time. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to basically change the function for this form, and the function for this form can be accessed at events. And now Dom has already talked about event-driven programming inside 5, so I won't cover that in detail. I just quickly go through it. So our process goes through multiple events such as create, select, show, close, cancel, run, and do run. And as you can see, we have some function attached on our do run event called as booking request. So let's go ahead and click on view. Now what 5 does is it's open up a code editor inside your browser, and now you have access to your old function, which was written in JavaScript. As you can see, it's actually a very simple function, which we are basically calling a simple SQL statement over here, which is populating a table called as customer again. We are getting all of the credentials from our process. And then we are executing that query by calling 5.execute query and passing all of these credentials as arguments. And then in the end, we are checking if that call is okay, response is okay or not. What we can also do inside this code editor is that I can highlight any piece of code, and I can actually ask an AI assistant here to explain that code to me. For example, let's say if we highlight this section of code, We click on explain code. Now 5 will tell actually processing what code you have written, and it will throw the code to our AI assistant. And now it actually explains the entire piece of code to you. Apart from that, you can also ask it for check for errors. Okay. So now what we want to talk about here, we wanted to basically attach this function to a third-party service. So what I have here right now is I've already written a function here called as send to Slack. What this function does is it actually just takes in the user credentials again. Then it sets up a simple HTTP client, sets it content to the customer has made a booking for a property, yada, yada, yada. And in the end, we are sending a simple post request to a particular webhook, which is provided to us by Slack. Basically, this webhook belongs to this particular Slack messaging channel over here. Okay, so basically vanilla JavaScript, what I would do is I would just simply copy this code, go back to my old code, go to the bottom and paste it. And after pasting my code, I would want to call it, which has been called over here already. So this is how I would tackle the situation inside vanilla code. So let's go vanilla JavaScript. So let's go ahead and save it. And let's run our application. And let's see how 5 handles that. So let's log in as an admin inside our property finder application. Let's go to customer, booking request. Let's quickly fill our booking request. My name is anything. Let's quickly select a booking time, which is 10th of May, and type in my email. Okay, so now ideally what should happen is if I open them on side by side, when I click on submit, 5 should actually send a message over here. So let's click on submit. And bam, in front of you, you can see that we have actually gotten a live message inside Slack that Prinoy has made a booking for the property this, and etc. etc. Okay, so as you can see, a high code inside 5 works exactly like your pure JavaScript. We can basically have as much creativity as you want over here. Slack was just an example, but basically you can send post and get requests to any other API or a webhook of your choice. Okay, so we talked about building and basically building your app. So let's now talk about deploying. Okay, so now Dom already said that 5 actually gives you 3 deployment environments for each application. But once I try to actually access my deployment environment here, you can see that I have only access to my development environment. Why is that? That is because I'm currently logged in as a developer inside 5. And developers, they don't just have privileges to directly push things into productions. Only admins have that right. So let's log out as a developer and log back in as an admin. Okay, let's go back to my application. Let's click on manage. And now if I go to my deployment environments, you can see that now the admin has access to all 3 environments, which is development, testing, and production. And with just a single click, your application starts getting deployed to that particular environment of your choice. All of them are independent. So after you have done sending application in the deployment environment, it can be sent to testing. And after it's been sent to testing, then it can be transferred into production. Okay, so as you can see, my application is already deployed. And if I click run, and it successfully runs. Okay, so let me log out and log back in as a developer. So since we talked about building and deploying your application, let me just quickly tell you how you can also maintain your applications inside 5. So as you can see, 5 actually gives you a bunch of tools that you can use to maintain your applications over here. Apart from that, every code that you have written inside 5, let's say our current code that we just wrote, let's say that we delete this piece of code, which is called as send to Slack, and we save it. So you can actually revert back to your old code just by clicking on this history button here, going back, clicking on edit, clicking on save. And now if I go back, you see that my code has been restored. And so it's that easy. Basically, every change inside 5 is actually recorded and you can revert back to any single change at any time. Last thing would be this little option called as run with inspector. What it does is it basically runs your app in a debug mode. And now when you run your application, you'll have access to this little debug menu over here, which basically shows all of your log, your entire execution tree, the queries that have been running in the background, and the global variables that have been inside your application. All in all, a very powerful debugging tool that you can use to debug your entire applications. And basically that was just so if I go back, that was just a very quick overview of 5. If you want to learn more about us, make sure you jump onto our website and where we have a community. We also have a YouTube page where you can go and basically we have a bunch of videos where you can learn much more about 5. With that, I would like to quickly end my demo and pass it back to Dom.
All right, thank you so much, Benoit. I'll quickly share my screen again to wrap things up. Second, here we go. Clicking this back into presentation mode. Here we go. All right, very quick demo of 5. So what we wanted to demonstrate today is really 2 things, right? We wanted to show you that we can really quickly build this sort of simple CRUD application on top of a MySQL database with multiple users and a pre-built UI in just a matter of minutes. Once you've done that, you can extend the application through the use of full code. So Benoit was demonstrating JavaScript functions, and you can build the application as complex as you need it to be. We did not go into the SQL editor, which is another way of customizing how your application works, for example. But the overall idea, as I said, low code really means 2 things: pre-built features that can be mixed with full code almost anywhere. So you can think of 5, or you can think of low code as a type of web application development framework that comes with a purpose-built IDE. Now, where do we want to take this product in the future? Just very briefly, 5 is actually designed to support WebAssembly. WebAssembly is a compilation target for many, many different programming languages that traditionally cannot be used inside the browser. Where you saw Benoit choosing JavaScript or TypeScript functions, in the future, you'll be able to write C# or C++ or Python. And that gives you extra flexibility because you can pick your preferred programming language straight inside of 5. Now, with that, I think there are only 2 minutes left of the official time. So do let me say thank you very much for joining. I saw we have a pretty large number of participants who stuck with us throughout the webinar, so thanks a lot for that. If you do have any more questions or feedback, I saw some of you posted them inside the Q&A session. You can also simply email me on dominic@5.co and I'll get back to you. And last but not least, let me say one more time, do make sure to register for our hackathon on 5.co/hackathon. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Jay from Cyberport. Thank you to Clifford from AWS. And of course, thanks Benoit for the demo. And I wish everyone a very good day ahead. Thanks everyone.